Hey guys, Joe Sidoti here, and thanks again for tuning in to another video. In this video, I'm going to talk about MIDI drums and how to make it sound and feel like a real person played them. I'm going to show you 5 basic steps you can take to make sure your virtual drums sound the best they can. Before this video is done, if you're not a drummer, you're going to be able to program MIDI like you are one. That starts right now. All right, MIDI drums. I think one of the most important things about MIDI drums is the human factor. I'm going to call it that. When you have just perfect hits every time, the same velocity, perfectly in time, it doesn't sound good, and it doesn't sound like, you know, a real person played the drums. The human factor, that's the trick. That's the thing. You can't put your fingers on it. You just say, that sounds real, that doesn't. And no matter how perfect you try and make it, it won't sound as good as when a killer human played it. And don't be afraid to have, you know, more dynamics than you think you would want in your MIDI drums. I mean, even the best drummers in the world have like hundreds of subtle variances in how they play and in their dynamics. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be just this perfect velocity. One of the reasons why they don't need to be dynamically perfect is non-linearity is a big part of the sound that you've been hearing for decades. You know, vintage EQs and compressors, they react to music. You got to give them something to react to. If everything is always the same, then your attack and your release, it doesn't have varying sounds and it doesn't give character. So you want to give that thing some life, and it will then speak back to you. Okay, so now that we've covered all of that, let's get into step 1, velocity. Alrighty, let's dive into Pro Tools. Okay, this is a song by Dustin Burke. I actually used this, I want to say, on Bass Amp Simulator. And what you probably maybe didn't realize is that this was MIDI drums that you were hearing. Here you can see kick in, kick out, snare, 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 toms, hi-hat, ride, overheads, room. That is me exporting out, you know, routing the SSD5 to multi-tracks so that I can kind of do some other tweaks and things to it. So I've made those be inactive, and we're going to be just talking about the MIDI and things that we're going to be doing and adjusting within the SSD5 plugin. I can't say enough good things about this. It has become such an amazing tool, especially when someone sends me a song that they have MIDI drums on. I will say this, one of the cool things about Logic is their drummer, you know, feature, where it'll just create all these different grooves, and they're really, you know, dynamic, and you can change the slider to make it more complex, less complex, soft, hard. And you can do some cool stuff with it from a MIDI performance stance, but the drums don't sound anywhere near as good as these. So in this case, this is what I got on this song. Dustin sent me this mix. He had originally done the drums in MIDI in Logic. Of course, he exported the MIDI file for me, and I brought it in and did a whole bunch of stuff to it. So that's just a little housekeeping there on what we're looking at. So step 1 is velocity. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up this here window. And I want to talk about, let's go to verse 2. Oh no, I'm there. Okay. talk about the difference between alternating velocities and accents as opposed to it just being a straight note. And so I'm going to show you that example with a hi-hat. This is a hi-hat being hit with a stick, and I'm going to play it for you. Here, let's solo just the drums. So let's take a listen to this verse 2 where I have alternated and randomized, and which we'll get to that, the velocity of this hi-hat. Okay, so did you hear the accent? That it wasn't just so this is what that would sound like. Let me, I'm just gonna select all of these and I'm gonna go up to event, change velocity. Let's get rid of this. And we're gonna make them all be just 127, right? Full on, as loud as they can go. This is what that sounds like. Pay attention to the hi-hat. And then I'll just undo that so we can hear the difference. Again, now this is with the subtleties, and I'll show you kind of what I did. So here is the beginning of the bar. So I'm actually not hitting the hi-hat on the bar because I'm pretending like this drummer hit the crash with his right hand and didn't hit the hi-hat until after he hit the crash. We're going to get to that. That's another point later. So the downbeats are going to be accented, and the upbeats are going to be slightly less velocity, which is going to give you that non-accented vibe. So this one here is hotter than this one here. This one here is hotter than this one here. You see that right here? Okay, this one's louder, quieter, louder, quieter. Louder, quieter. But I did more than just, I didn't just select. I didn't just do that all the way down and then set the settings. What I did was I set it, I clicked and highlighted every other note, and then those notes I want to be somewhere between 80 and 90. So I'm kind of humanizing it. And matter of fact, Logic has a feature that's basically this, the randomizing feature that they refer to as humanize. So this is step one of how you get the accents to sound real, like a human that played it had a feel and a groove. I selected those accent notes and I changed them, or I selected the non-accents, I guess is what you'd call it, with a randomness of 53% or whatever that is, and between 80 and 90, that's the velocity. So 127's max, so somewhere between 80 and 90, so much lower than the 127, but all of those ones that are lower are going to fluctuate within, you know, that 80 to 90. So does that make sense? So that's what I did to get this variance. So that is step one. So we've looked at that. Now let's get on to step two. Okay, step 2 is the fact that you have to remember that you only have, or the drummer only has 4 limbs, max, right? I mean, obviously we know drummers that don't have 4 limbs. But that's your max, right? You have 4 limbs, 2 arms, 2 feet. And so there are some limitations if you're going to be programming drums like a human that you just can't do. You can't hit 2 crashes and the snare drum at the same time. Yeah. I just thought of a really funny thing. You could, but I'm not going to say it. You can't be doing a tom fill while you're crashing on a crash. Okay, does that make sense? I hope so. So you have to program as if that's reality. So here's an example. I talked about it just in step 1, how I didn't hit the hi-hat here on the downbeat because I hit the crash. And so I just imagined it was crash. Makes sense? And then when you do a snare fill, so halfway between this drum part here is a snare fill. You'll notice right here, the hi-hat stops. Okay, we don't keep the hi-hat going. So here we go, play that again. So on just that little drum fill, okay, it took two hands to do that little snare fill. So obviously you're not going to keep the hi-hat going at the same time. You can't. Now you can use your foot on the hi-hat. Okay, that's a different thing, but you can't use your hand. Let's see if I can find another drum fill example that is got the human factor. Okay, I think I found a good spot. So this is a heavier part of the song where now we are writing the crash cymbal and doing some fills and some things. And so you're gonna see that when the crash is being ridden and then there's a drum fill, the crash stops, right? You let it ring out and it sounds natural. Here's what that sounds like. Now, I also should add that there's a second crash. So on some of this, it was 2 crashes, but there's nothing else happening with either hand when I hit those 2 crashes. So it's boom, cut, right? Now I'm back. So let's listen to that. Okay, so does that make sense that the ride cymbal has to stop if I'm hitting the snare or doing a drum fill? Here's another example. Okay, so that's pretty self-explanatory. I will add this. One little final thing in step 2 here is try using the foot, the hi-hat with the foot on certain parts to make it sound human. Here is a part where there's a break, and I kind of imagine, so when I was doing this, of course I was imagining I was playing drums on it. I am a drummer, by the way, if you didn't know that. I've been playing drums for over 20 years, maybe almost 30 years. Yeah, I think so. Been playing drums and been in lots of bands. Some you may have heard of, some you may have not. It doesn't matter. But here's what I would have done if I was tracking this live with a band and there was a guitar player and a bass player with me. Even though I might be on a click track, I'm going to do this. Watch, listen. The little foot hi-hats, I'm just keeping time for them, right? So that they that kind of stay in, and it's just a cool vibe. So just don't forget the foot. That's really, you know, a big thing. Now, if you're crashing and you wish that you had something else on the left and you keep wanting to program something that a drummer can't really do, if it's a texture thing, you know, that's where you can add a tambourine or a shaker, and that kind of stuff works really cool. All right, that's pretty much step 2. All right, here we go, step 3. Okay, step 3 is about the subtle things like ghost notes, hitting the center of the snare drum versus the rim shot of the snare drum. I'll show you that when we get into actually taking a deeper look into SSD5. I'll show you that. But let me give you some examples of where there's ghost notes. Now in Pro Tools, it's dark blue versus light blue. That's showing you the darker the blue, the higher the velocity, and the lighter the blue, the lower the velocity. So like you can see here, real light blue versus real dark blue, and right here and here, there's all sorts of variances. Of course, if I were to highlight just these, okay, that is the snare center and the snare rim shot. And if you look at the velocity, I've got them, you know, all over the place. Especially here, right? Let's see what that sounds like. This soft blue to dark blue. Do you hear that? Do you hear how the snare starts soft and then gets hard? So does the floor tom. Here's the floor tom. Soft, harder, harder, and hardest, right? Actually, that's the rack tom, sorry. And then it's real heavy towards the end. So all in all, it goes from soft to hard. So that's all that I want to talk about that as far as that. And I mean, that's what a ghost note is, right? It's a small little flourish of the snare drum. It's in time, but it's much softer. It's usually an accent, but it's what makes it sound human. So really pay attention to that. And let me show you something too. When you do a snare fill, this is huge. This is a subtle thing, but it matters. If you are using a snare sample or a program and it's always set to rim shot, no matter what, then that's where it starts to sound like fake snare drum when you do a da 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 da, and it's all pure, perfect, same sample, rim shot. It won't sound real. You'll definitely have to blend that in with real drums. And that's fine if you're doing sample supplementation, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about having this thing stand alone as sounding real. So if we look at this right here, let's listen to this area. I believe that's a snare fill, and you'll see that there's a flam. Here, let me zoom in for you. So there's a flam here. This is snare center, this is snare rim. This one's just a little ahead of the beat. This one's just a little bit behind the beat. And then the snare fill though, it's rim shot, center, rim shot. Here's center, rim shot. So let's listen to that. I'm gonna find another spot too that's got some snare fills. Here's a better example that I found of a snare fill that is alternating from snare center to rim shot, softer, snare simple. I believe that's what that is. Maybe it's vice versa. Yeah, that's what it is, sorry. It's rim shot, center, but you get the point. So listen to that. So just that snare fill. it sounds real. It sounds good, and that's just a subtle thing, right? So that's what step 3 is. It's about subtle things like ghost notes, center versus rim shot, and the flam. If you remember looking at the flam, here's another flam. I'll show you where one is a little bit early. Here's the grid right here. So one, I think this is the snare center head, and that's the rim shot, is a little bit early, and this one is a little bit late. If you don't do that, first of all, it won't sound like a flange, and depending on how these were recorded and exported and processed, it could flange out on a flam. So it could actually like comb filter, and it definitely sounds really funky. So you always want to make sure one's a little bit early, one's a little bit late, and then you get that bah. And that's really, you know, what you're doing when you're playing a flam is one arm is kind of going higher than the other so that when you hit, they hit at different times. And that's all this is. Make sense? Okay, that is step 3. Moving on to step 4. Okay, so step 4 is bleeding, or, you know, mics bleeding into other mics, what's in your room, what is in your overheads, and making sure that that sounds real. Is there a ring function on your snare drum? And so let's dive into some of that in Steven Slate Drums version 5.5, actually, I believe. Here's what I mean by that. So I'm going to select, first of all, this kit that I have created is my own little hybrid. It started out as a preset, and then I changed out some stuff, so I couldn't even tell you what it started as. I can tell you that the toms are Pearl 10, 12, 14, sorry, 10, 12, 16, 18. And then it's a couple different kicks, it's a couple different snares, it's 3 different snare samples, all blended. Actually, it's 4 snare samples, I believe. Yeah, but here's a perfect example. This 18-inch floor tom, right here, here's the articulation that they give you, which is basically hitting the tom or clicking on the rim of the tom. Those are your 2 articulations. So if, you know, and these are different MIDI notes. So when you see just the floor tom note, that's just this guy right here, as opposed to this. Okay, so I've just got that at -2, but here's that tom in the mix. Here's how much of that tom is being fed into the overheads, at what level, and what pan. So Slate has done an amazing job of, if you leave this stuff panned up the middle, it's still panned in the overheads. It may not be as wide of a sound that you want, or it may be just fine. So I wanted it just a little bit wider. I wanted it extra hyped in the stereo width. So I panned it. The actual floor tom itself, as you can see right here, is panned at 77. So it's panned real hard right. But in the overheads, it was panned some right. I'm just goosing it a little bit more. This is how much floor tom is going into the rooms. And in this case, there's 2 different room options, room and then room B. And then SLR, I can't remember what it stands for. Go look it up on their website. But what it is things like when I hit the tom, the snares rattle. Things like that, right? The real stuff that happens that are those, again, those intangibles that you really just, you can't put your finger on it, but it's what makes it sound real. Let's look at the mixer of this. For the most part, I have everything at original dynamics. so that it truly takes on the dynamics that I've programmed into the Midi. But I'm going to solo just the room A and the room B and the SLR. And I want to show you what you can do to get your rooms to sound more like what you want, more like how it was. So let's listen to that. Turn it up a bit. Okay. Now, let's say I wanted more kick drum in that room. I can select this kick drum here and I can turn it up in the room. So I'm going to turn it down and I'm going to turn this one down and I'm going to bring them up, and so you can hear the difference. So here should be very little kick in the room, if any at all. So you see how that's working. You can actually dial in what's in your rooms. The overheads, some of these things have the option for overheads, like those toms did. So there's plenty of toms in the overheads and the rooms and all that sort of stuff. Now, if you really want to tweak your overheads a bit more, there's a little bit less you can do, but when you're editing your kit, obviously the cymbals are going to be coming through your overheads. So you can put cymbals in the rooms, or you can, just put them in the overheads, obviously. I have them panned, again, even a little bit harder. Wait, which side is that for you? Is that side? I never remember. No, it's this side, right? I don't know. There's one side, there's the other side. I've got the China real hard right. The right cymbal somewhere in there. Tom's panning in the overheads a little bit. Now again, they're already panned, but I wanted it even wider. So I show you all this just to say, you've got to be able to tweak the rooms and the overheads and allow there to be ring on the snare if that's an option. That is not an option on this kit, but if it was, there'd be a fader here that says ring or snare ring, and when I have that as an option, even though I want a dead snare sound, I still bring in some of that ring. You'll never hear it in the whole song, but it's part of reality. It's part of what would have truly been there had this been a real drummer on real drums in a real room using real mics. And that's what you want to be aiming for. Okay, that's step 4. Final step 5. Step 5 is my favorite step. It is EQ, dynamics, and processing, and all that sort of stuff. These drums sound really good from Slate, there's no question. And if you just kept them how they come from the presets, your drums are going to sound great. But depending on the song, depending on the vibe you're going for, you can really spice them up. And that's what I'm going to show you. So you already know we got the sampler plugin. Okay, that's going out drum bus. All that mixing of the whole drum kit is just happening within SSD5 and those faders right now. We're just hearing a stereo blend of that. Then they go into the VMR. So this is the entire kit, the entire drum bus. And this would be the same whether the tracks were individually bounced out, which, by the way, side note, if you want to see a video on how to route for multi-track mixing of SSD drums, leave a comment below, and if I get enough of you guys saying that you want to see that, I'll show you that. It's easy, but you can get lost if you're not careful. So I could certainly show you how to do that. But nevertheless, this is just a stereo mix of the drums. It's coming into a virtual channel with some extra drive on the 4KE setting. I'm then hitting the preamp mode of the New York virtual collection. I try these sometimes. I try the LA, the London, the New York, and whichever one does something for me. I can't tell you, which is my favorite. I don't really have one. EQ, a little bit of compression. Then, pretending that this is a real bus, I'm putting the virtual mix bus on that. And then I've turned it down a little bit because I'm adding a whole bunch of gain, doing some stuff. And then after that, it goes into the virtual tape machine on the 2-inch setting and 30 IPS. So let me play you the drums with all that, and then I'll play you the drums without all that. Let's see, this was at about what? Minus 2.7. Here's what they sound like with the processing. And here's what they sound like without the processing. Wah, wah. I mean, I can turn it up. So let's bring it up 3 dB. And here it is again without the processing. Like I said, it's not bad, but compared to this, and then here's what that sounds like in the whole mix of things. Here's where it's a big part of the chorus. I rest my case. And that's it, guys. Those are the 5 steps I wanted to show you. So let's recap. Step 1, velocity. Having those accent notes and changing velocities from to, on like the hi-hats and the snare and the tom fills, really thinking through the dynamics of how these would have been played. Step 2 is you only have 4 limbs, so max. Only program what is actually possible to play. Step 3 was the subtle things like ghost notes, center snare versus rim shot, and making sure that you are taking the time to nudge little things for like flam hits and getting those ghost notes and those subtle things right. So that was step number 3. Step 4 was the toms and the snare and the kicks into the room mics and the overheads and the bleed channel, getting all of that. Don't forget to add that all in, and snare ring if that's an option, because that is just yet another step that makes it sound real. And step 5 was the EQ and the dynamics. Adding some dirt, some grit, some distortion, some EQ, just whatever you might do to really pump up your drums. You need to still do that in the mix, and it will really help these things to just sing and sound aggressive and awesome if that's what you're going for. In this case, I was. All right, guys, well, that's it, man. I really appreciate your time. I hope this video helped you. I hope that you got something out of it. Let me know in the comments if you're digging what I'm putting out, and if you want to see some other topics. That's the place to do it, guys. Let's start a dialogue. I'm happy to do that. But again, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you on the next video. If you like this video, then click that like button, I appreciate it, and subscribe to the channel and help support Sidoti Sound, and click that bell if you want to be notified when I release new videos. And of course, you can find me on all sorts of social media, so be sure to check that out. All right, guys, thanks a lot.